What's going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and today I've got my review and experience of the Samsung Galaxy S10e. So when Samsung announced their lineup of smartphones last month, the S10, the S10 Plus, and even the Galaxy Fold got a ton of the attention. One device that I feel like should get a little bit more attention though, and a lot of people should actually consider in some cases over the S10 and S10 Plus, is the S10e, and I feel like Samsung's done a very good job, aside from the price, to differentiate it in a number of ways that make it a very compelling option. I also did a full review of the Galaxy S10 Plus though, so make sure you check that link down below, and I think it's overall a very good device, but after using the S10e, there's a lot of things I like about this as well. Not only has Samsung taken the same pricing approach as the iPhone XR at $750 US, Samsung's actually had a lot of other budget devices that were cheaper than the flagship but weren't exactly labeled in the same lineup, so it's cool to see that this year you have the official S10e, which fits into the same class but at a lower pricing start point. And at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about kind of the approaches that Apple and Samsung have taken to their entry-level flagships. If you want a chance to win a Samsung Galaxy S10 though, I'm giving away one on the channel, so just make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a like on this video, and also leave a comment down below. And also follow me on Instagram and Twitter, as that's where I'm going to be announcing the winner once the giveaway ends, and the links to everything as well as the link to enter will be down in the description section below. So this device is actually the smallest one in Samsung's lineup, where the S10 Plus comes in at 6.4, the S10 at 6.1, and this one at 5.8. When it comes to real dimensions though, the S10e is actually only a few millimeters smaller and almost identical overall to the size of the S10. This one actually does have some small feature variations though, which I feel in some cases you could argue is better than what the S10 and S10 Plus has. So I think the biggest one overall, first and foremost, is the fact that the fingerprint sensor is built into the side, and I actually really like that because it is nice and fast, but it is also easy to reach, and the button itself is nice and wide. They have also kind of recessed it, so there isn't any trying to figure out where exactly it is, and even though some might prefer it to be on the back, especially if you are a left-handed smartphone user, I think on the side is actually pretty nice. The only thing I will say is that they definitely could have moved the button down just a little bit, and that would just make it the perfect position for when you just pick up the phone at any time. I think the biggest advantage though is that in terms of speed, it is noticeably faster than the one on the Galaxy S10 and S10 Plus. Even though the future is going to in-display fingerprint sensors, and they are getting better and better in just the first few months that they've come out. For those who are familiar with the traditional fingerprint sensors and just want something that is very fast, reliable, and proven over the years, then the S10e is going to be the only one you're going to get that on. Aside from the fact that the S10e is the only phone that comes in the yellow color, whether you think it's nice or extremely ugly, I'm honestly still trying to decide. There are a couple things that Samsung has done to make it a little bit different. Some other things when it comes to the buttons though is the fact that you still have the Bixby button found on the left side, which is now customizable, but your volume rockers are actually above that. What I would have liked to have seen, especially on the S10e model, is just to remove that Bixby button and have the volume rockers a little bit lower. That is definitely something that I think a lot of people wish for and would have liked to have seen in at least one of the models. On the bottom you still have your headphone jack and your USB Type-C port, as well as your micro SD card slot on the top, so there's nothing that you lose in terms of ports and I/O. The standard model comes with 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage, and the upgraded model gets you 8 gigs of RAM, which is the minimum that you find on the S10 and S10 Plus. But honestly, at this point, whether it's 6 gigs, 4 gigs, or 8 gigs, you're not really going to notice a major difference in just everyday tasks. So now onto the display, which seems to be one of the biggest corners that companies cut when it comes to a budget flagship model. This device though doesn't really seem to do that. It's still got an excellent display, but you do have to remember that the Samsung Galaxy S10 and S10 Plus has potentially the best display on the market. On this device though, you're going to find a 5.8-inch display that has a 2280 by 1080 resolution, which still gets you a PPI of well into the 400s. This is obviously lower than the 3040 by 1440 display found on the S10 and S10 Plus, which looks really good, but the one on the Galaxy S10e still looks excellent. If you're going to compare it side by side, you might notice a bit of a difference, but honestly, for everyday use and just from using the Galaxy S10e, I have no complaints at all, and if you do, you might be a little bit crazy. Unlike Apple going with an LCD display on the lower end model though, this display is an AMOLED. The Galaxy S10e still has a hole punch display that you found on the rest of the lineup, which goes all the way around and looks really futuristic. Samsung wasn't the first company to do it, but after using the S10 line for a couple weeks now, I actually really like it, and I think it's definitely going to be the future. The other thing that you will notice is that the bezels on the S10e is a little bit wider. It is noticeable, but in my opinion, it's not really a big complaint to have. It's just on the visual side of things. If anything, even though I love the fact that the display on the S10 Plus and S10 wraps all the way around the edge, it is prone to a lot of accidental swipes and touches because of how close to the edge it goes and curves around. So if that's something that you notice or really annoys you, then the flat display on the S10e solves that problem completely. When it comes to build, even though the S10e is only a fraction of a millimeter wider than the S10, I actually found it to be more comfortable to use in the hand because of the slightly thicker display. When it comes to the way the device feels in the hand, I actually do prefer the S10e because it is a little bit thicker and the edges are wider and it just feels a little bit more solid and robust in the hand, even though it is the same primary material as its brothers. The kind of edge and seamless glass feel is nice, but as an everyday device, you want something that you don't feel like is going to break the first time you drop it. So when it comes to the camera on the Galaxy S10e, you have 2 cameras instead of 3. And for some people that might be a bigger trade-off than others, but what I do like is that the 2 cameras are the wide camera and the main camera, as opposed to the normal and telephoto that normally companies like to go with. Samsung's always been doing a very good job on their cameras, but I always found their secondary camera to have a noticeably worse quality than the primary. The wide camera on the Galaxy S10s is one of my favorite features this year, and I think it looks really good, especially for stuff like Instagram story videos where you're stuck to shooting in vertical. For those who don't know, the wide camera is a 16 megapixel sensor at an f2.2 aperture with no optical image stabilization, which is pretty standard for wide cameras, while the main camera is a 12 megapixel sensor that drops down to an aperture of f1.5. Photos on the Galaxy S10 line is very consistent. The quality is definitely there when it comes to the photos, just in terms of sharpness, the color balance. The photos definitely lean towards the vibrant side, but they're not like overly contrasted, especially if you compare it to Google, for example. And like I said, especially for photos, the wide angle camera is something that I love to use. The low light images on the Galaxy S10 are pretty good as well. I would say it's not as good as Google, obviously, who have kind of taken the reins of the best low light camera with the processing and everything, but it definitely does beat out the iPhone for sure. And I think what I like about the Samsung is that it still does retain kind of a natural look to it without too much over processing when it comes to low light images. As for video recording, the experience is really similar to photos. The camera overall did a very good job judging the scenarios. There's a lot of detail, and the stabilization in 4K is still pretty good as well. But if you do want to record wide video, you do have to remember that there isn't any stabilization, so you do have to be a little bit more careful, especially with motion. I did kind of try to solve the issue by using a smartphone gimbal, but the problem I did have is that the camera in the wide mode is just so wide that the gimbal is actually in the frame quite a bit. If you don't have to record video in 4K though, the super steady mode in video in full HD is really impressive and one of the best stabilization that I've seen on any smartphone to date. The front cam on this guy is 10 megapixels at an f1.9 aperture, and that also has dual pixel autofocus. Overall, the quality on the front camera is really good, and I do like to see that it also has the ability to record 4K video at 30 frames per second on the front. So now onto the battery and charging, and this device has a 3100 mAh battery, which is the smallest in its lineup this year, but it is larger than the battery that you're going to find on the Galaxy S9 from last year. From my experiences, I was able to get through an entire day, but nothing much more than that, and I will say compared to the Galaxy S10 and S10 Plus, the battery life was the shortest of the 3, but not by too much. You do also have reverse wireless charging, which depending on how much you're really going to use it, if you have the Galaxy Buds for example, it might come in handy, or if your friend needs to charge your device, but it's a nice feature that I think we'll see in many other smartphones this year. A feature that I do think a lot of people will find useful though is the faster wireless charging with Wireless Charge 2.0 support, which lets you charge the device up to 38% faster. Aside from Samsung, there currently aren't many wireless charging pads that support the faster speeds that are at a good price, but when more of them come out, I think it'll be something that you should definitely pick up if you're an S10 owner. So now to compare the biggest rivals in the $750 price point, which is considered the budget flagship for both companies, Apple and Samsung, which one will I say is going to be the better option? So I think first and foremost, your decision is going to be based on software. So if you like iOS or your ecosystem is that, then get the iPhone. But in terms of hardware, I think Samsung has overall done a better job than what Apple has done. And some of the examples when it comes to that is the dual camera setup instead of the single setup, and the fact that you still have an AMOLED display with a nice PPI as well as the hole punch on the front. Both devices have the same internal flagship specs and processors as their bigger brothers, but on the Samsung Galaxy S10 you do have a headphone jack and expandable storage, which on the iPhone you really don't. You're also comparing Face ID to a fingerprint sensor, but I will say the iPhone definitely has the edge when it comes to having a better battery life. I also think it's pretty smart that Apple has made the XR the mid-size in their lineup as opposed to Samsung making it their smallest, which for someone like me who feels like the iPhone XR is actually the best size but wants a dual camera setup, I really had no choice but to go with the XS or XS Max. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching my review of the Samsung Galaxy S10e, and if you didn't already, go ahead and check out my review of the S10 Plus and the iPhone XR, and I'll see you guys in the next video.